influence on urban fabric and practices. Architects, experts from the island are knowing them, and they also collaborated in international workshops to consolidate their transnational urbaning practice. Here you got an example of a transdisciplinary work lab with architects from Swiss and La Corail, okay, which is sobre todo José Antonio Echevarría Aerotechnic Institute. And they developed a sustainable vision together for the historic port of Havana. Okay. The other circulating thing is led by private actors, which are more and more important in the reinvestment of Havana. These private actors also play a role in revitalization and tend to develop new places according to globalized trend. You got here Taraos, perhaps some of you know, in El Dorado, which opened in 2015, and it's the crab in a blog called Visit Cuba, so an American blog. Let me quote for you. It's about that would be just another odd place in LA or London, but it is in Havana, on the side street in a largely residential area. All we can say is, wow, the arrival of Sarao is a demonstration that the privately run club is here in Cuba and drawing both tourists and local. So this kind of example in a Vedado residential neighborhood is a good example to show how private initiatives are occurring in Havana and transforming also residential spaces in commercial ones, okay? And changing by this phenomenon attractiveness of street or sub-neighborhood. So to calculate what is attractiveness, I began to map how the real estate market is in the three neighborhoods I told. So since October 2015 and in April 2016, November 2016, March 2017 and July, I had a Jaime assistant research collecting all real estate ads on 4 websites of inmobiliarias and 2 Cuban websites, we are Revolico and Por la Libre, in view to map them and get a GPS. We collect more than 7 data, but most of them were incomplete. As you can see on the screen, this is the kind of data we want to have every time we collect a hat. So we want type, price, rooms, bathroom, superficie, which level it is, and year of building. Okay. And we also, and Zorrego wants the exact location to be able to map it exactly. So there was a lot of sales we can't choose Zorrego and Revolico and Por la Libre because there wasn't exactly the place where the houses was. But we get through that, and we still have like 600 entries for 2015, for 450 for 2016, and we still are constructing the database for 2017. So what we have, if we map it with the smaller scale of Cuban geography, which are los consejos populares, we kind of have this big red Playa Miramar neighborhood appearing. So what you can see in the screen are average price. Okay, we calculated the average of every polygon, and but we collected sales announcement from 1,500, which was a really tiny room, to 1.5 million. So that was a higher price we found collecting data. And what we had when we start to map it, it's like, okay, these are good, but it's too general. I know, I'm almost finished. And we want to, so we try to create our proper sector to analyze the flow of money and price in those three neighborhoods. So what we did is, like, for example, you can see, like, on the source of La Habana Vieja, we had a sector who had an average price of 15,000, but you only get 1 point. So that doesn't mean nothing, it doesn't representative. So we began to make our own sector to have at least 20 or 30 price by sector, and have something like we can call urban homogeneity. So if you can see, you got the sector between Lineal, 23 y Presidente, which is like the more attractive cultural tourist practice of the Vedado. And then we have like several neighborhoods in Playa Miramar, which are more representing what we want to show. What you can see with the average of price in those 2-year collection of data is like you get the hotspots really connected to tourism and old bourgeois neighborhood. Without any surprise, the price in Miramar or in Playa are really higher than the price in Belén or San Isidro, for example. Okay? But so we are just mapping evidences in some point, but it's for us a point to start to conduct interview in the part of the city where the market is higher. Okay? In view to get information about who is buying and how money is circulating. In conclusion, the urban development and reutilization are connected to the circulation of urban model, as I showed, and reveal an equal connection of neighborhood as to global and transnational flows. Real estate market and revitalization reveal the reinvestment of former bourgeois neighborhood and an important link with tourism and transnational flow. Residential mobility, real estate, and transnational connection should be investigated by what I plan to do, in order to underline the different mobility regimes that influence the right to the city. I thank you.
Very good, thank you. We're going to take questions at the end because we have a discussion, so it'd be better if we hear all the presentations first and then the discussion, and then we'll open it to the floor. So our next presenter is Sergio Diaz-Piquet. Sergio is a demographer. He is an independent international consultant with a long-standing interest in the Cuban housing sector. He received his doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania and has published in various development-related topics, including a number of books on Cuba. Sergio, his presentation is going to be on the subject of recognizing the obvious while modeling the housing waters.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My paper is going to be different from the other two, which essentially focus on the city of Havana. What I've tried to do, I mean, this was Jorge Perez Lopez suggested that I pursue this, and given that there have been a number of housing reforms in recent years. But in order to do that, I decided that it would be to begin with an overview of what the history of the housing sector in Cuba, from the very beginning, and the recognition that one of the early promises or challenges of the revolution was solving the housing question in Cuba from the very beginning. I did not go for all enough. I should have begun with the pastorita houses, but I didn't. But essentially, you know, I begin to look at the historical trends in housing. And for example, here we have what the statistics suggest has been the history of housing in Cuba. You know, in the early years, we all know, great emphasis on moving away from, you know, neglecting, quote unquote, housing construction in Havana towards solving the rural housing question. But the rate of construction was relatively low. Population was about maybe 60% or 40% less than it is now. There was a lot of housing made available, however, because about 500,000 Cubans left. So you assume 4, maybe 5 people per home. So you created, quote unquote, 100,000 to 120,000 units. There was a lot of mobility towards those homes. And the periods are not of equal length. I just try to break the periods into significant political or economical issues. The second period was the highest. It was the peak of the Soviet Union support for Cuba, or pretty high at the time, where there was a lot of attention given to the housing sector. Again, you have to look back, the baby boom of the 60s and 70s before family formation period began, so there was a lot of pressure on housing. Migration also was less. Then we moved to the other period, the special period, which surprised me that a number of housing units was quite high, higher than I would have expected. But again, you have the housing creation effect of immigration, which in fact was the highest period of immigration in Cuba since the revolution, far more than during the 60s and 70s. So this has been, if you add the 2 million, quote unquote, 2 million, whatever number of Cubans, including those who have died here, who have left, there has been a lot of housing availability being created by immigration. And of course, if we look at the most recent period, there's been a major decline in housing construction to the point that by mid-2017, this was some data reported in Graham and all the standard Cuban journals, they had only completed, this is by the state and the private sector, less than 6,000 homes. And the target, if it reached, would have been even less than half of what it was in the prior period. So really, the housing reforms were crucial. I began to look at this, and this, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can read this table or not, but this was some statistics I found rather fascinating, because the general idea is that the housing deterioration in Havana is far worse than it is anyplace else. Well, if you look at this data, it contradicts that fact. For example, it is as bad, I will only have data for 4 provinces, Camagüey, Holguín, Santiago, and Havana. And if you could see about Ciudad Havana, Holguín, and Santiago, the rates are about the same. Again, you have to remember housing deterioration. And I have to make a point. Carmelo made a point yesterday, I've been reading papers before. The government just acknowledged that the housing deficit, quote unquote, whichever is defined, is about 830,000 units on a population of about 11 million people. A ratio of 3 to 1, a small family size, that gives you an idea. But we, the outside people who've been looking at this data, believe it's far less. I think, and based not on the housing concept per se, but a concept used by the government itself, and they define very specific characteristics of adequate housing. If you look at the question of adequate housing, it seems to me it's far worse. But the point here is, look at Holguín. The rate is far higher than it is in Havana. Why? And I'll go into that, but just a hint. I suspect that the concentration of post-Soviet housing has something to do with that. Probably the closure of many of the sugar mills that have displaced from the batalles, especially in Eastern Cuba, a lot of people towards the cities. So these are speculations that I want to pursue later, but just to give you a hint. But I think that to really highlight the issue that Havana is not the only problem. The housing issue is across the country. Well, then I went into the lineamientos, the guidelines in my loose translation, and interestingly enough, the Seventh Party Congress, I believe had 8 or 9, there were supposedly wide consultation, whatever that means in the Cuban context. They were reduced to, I believe, 6. And what I found interesting, the whole ideological debate and the whole wording of issues in Cuba, on the Seventh Party guideline, I believe it was guideline 234, 235, one word disappeared. When we talk in Cuba about property transfers, that's the word they use, transfers. But if you go to the Sixth Party guideline, they have a word, compraventa. It disappeared on the final guideline, so now it's transfer. If it's understood, it's subsumed under the transfer, the compraventa. So I think, the ideological thing is there. but to be a significant. Well, so what is interesting, I then began the legal and regulatory reforms, and there has been follow-up and compliance with the guidelines. Pretty much they have acted on what they were promising, and they have done a number of things, even before the guidelines were approved, the final guidelines in the six-party Congress. And, you know, I'm briefly listing them as best as I can determine. 2011, there were announced a number of measures that people could buy from subsidized construction inputs. If you follow the Cuban press, a number of things that appear here and there, it's clear that it's tons of problems. They don't have supplies, the stores are not available, and so on and so forth. The main change, which these two ladies here in a way are focusing on, are the follow-up to the Decree Law 288 that allows for the voluntary exchange, the sales of homes, permutas, and so on and so forth. The most consequential to me was the January 2012 announcement, the regulations authorizing the housing subsidies for needy families. Then the Decree Law 322 and complementary regulations to expand construction options, and I'll go into that a little bit, and the Instituto de Planificación Física Authority, which is a rather interesting development in my mind. And finally, on April just this year, the Council of Ministers Executive Council Resolution 1893 to modify the subsidy regime, legalize previously constructed self-help units, housing, procedures for housing subsidy reimbursements if certain conditions are not met, the transfer of state-owned housing units of the construction, and finally the referential value system for taxation purposes. Very quickly. Okay, so basically I don't have time to go into much detail. I'll try as best as I can. So I try to really look at the reforms and what in my estimation is going to be the impact in housing availability. Excluding at this point the issue of quality, although it has to be there. And I assume that that some will have some marginal impact, others will have maybe a greater, and I said potentially, because there's many issues associated here. You know, and marginal impact are, you know, if you look at the measures, especially the ones in, I believe, 2005, essentially they don't have any impact whatsoever. If you're looking at the question of housing availability, because if you do the September 2014, you know, just transferring title to those people who were impacted by the hurricanes and other catastrophes, natural catastrophes, to legalize title to their homes is not going to expand the set of homes, the stock of homes. It may allow them, and some of the intent is to allow them, once they have the title, to access the subsidies from the government to improve or whatever their homes. The self-help house, that's one. The transfer of uncompleted homes, well, the government was building the homes. They recognize that they cannot, for a number of reasons, they cannot complete the house. So I go to Carmelo and say, Carmelo, would you take these homes? Would you commit yourself to complete this home? And Carmelo says yes, and maybe I give him a subsidy, and Carmelo completes the home. So it really doesn't add anything new to the new homes. And then finally, the home sales is a great thing from a choice standpoint, opens up some degree of freedom, of liberty of people to buy or sell their homes. It would allow for some accommodations, and this is, I think, one of the papers, yes, makes the point that, you know, some old lady who, this family emigrated using this home, she wants to downsize as we do here, you know, snowbirds move to Florida, so it would allow some freedom of that. Potentially greater impact, the sale of unsubsidized construction inputs. Here, clearly, we are talking about those with international connections or those who, very few who are doing rather well in the national economy. And then finally the subsidies. The problem with the subsidies, and this is unknown, but I came across some estimate, I don't know where they got it from, some lady at the New York Times, that she reviewed some estimates from the rebuilding the housing sector in Cuba, anywhere from $3 to $6 billion. The latest estimate of the subsidy for repairs and housing construction in Cuba was 120 million CUPs. So in relative terms, it's not much. But, it's a beginning, so to the extent that you can, they're trying to do better markets and so forth. So basically, and I think this is my last slide, why do I think that the problems of the housing sector in Cuba are of all standing? And, and they are very clear. The early years of the revolution, historical neglect of the housing sector and shifting priorities, escuelas en el campo, Curaguá, Dique Sur, the tunnels, the famous, resources are finite, and concrete is finite, and cement is finite, so had they allocated the resources to the proper sectors, might have been better. So the lack of maintenance of the pre-1959 stock. I was fascinated by a paper, and therefore I can validate this for us, that in Havana people are looking for homes, and they talk about construcción capitalista. They pay more, it's more better. I think another major thing that, how gullible we've been. I'm sorry about the picture of calling, but how we used to fund, or at least with the global community, about the wonderful new construction methods implemented in socialist Cuba. The microbrigadas, the trabajo voluntario. Sylvia was telling me that she did some of that. Well, it makes sense. If you ask me to build a home, it's going to be a disaster. And we are paying the fighters coming home. All this housing that was built by unqualified labor, we know that the prefabricated components were a disaster. So now there's enormous amount of documentation in the press, independent press and others, that some of these microbrigadas or prefabricated houses are collapsing. So, it's just the accumulation of 60 years of neglect, pure construction, shoddy maintenance, and I think the last one is interference with private sector construction. Here in this society, we take care of our things. In Cuba, there were multiple impediments over 60 years to allow for people to take care of their own home, aside from financing and others. So, basically, just to close, I have 1 more minute. I think for the housing solution in Cuba to be resolved, it would take a heck of a lot more than the subsidy program and housing. We need a new paradigm, whichever you want to call it, capitalist socialism or market economy, whatever. I don't want to get into that. The second most obvious, growth. We need growth. We need to develop the resources to really come up with the $6 billion that need to be required to really turn around the housing sector. And finally, and I think that I stole this from one of our commentators who unfortunately couldn't come in, was that Amor, who said in a recent paper that you don't need to go very far. You can ask the developers here in Miami what needs to be done to turn around the housing sector. So really, market-driven options, entrepreneurship, capital investment for the future, for you to discuss. Thanks.
Thank you. Sergio? All right, and the last presentation is by Martina Kunovic from the University of Wisconsin-Madison on Cuba's emerging real estate sector, a closer look at Havana's inmobiliarias. Martina is a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology of the University of Wisconsin. Her dissertation project examines the real estate market in contemporary Havana, using it as a lens to examine broader social transformations underway in Cuba's changing economy. She was a visiting researcher at the Instituto Cubano de Investigación Cultural Juan Marinello in 2015-16 and completed a pasantía in Flaxo, Cuba in 2014. She holds a master's degree in sociology from McGill University and a bachelor's from Western University in London, Ontario.
Before we start, I just want to invite those who are in that corner of the room, if you would like. I have 2 tables. I don't know if many slides, but it might be a little bit difficult to see from this side. So if you want to take the opportunity to move a little closer, I invite you.
The bad students always sit in the back of the
Okay, my talk today is about a relatively new and important actor in the budding real estate scene in Cuba, private real estate agencies, or inmobiliarias particulares. These private real estate agencies exist at the nexus of 2 of the most significant reforms introduced by the Cuban state since the beginning of the process of the actualización del modelo económico del país. Reforms expanding private employment on the one hand, and on the other, the legalization of the purchase and sale of residential real estate among private individuals at prices that they themselves freely determine. And that, as Sergio told us, is Decree Law 288, introduced in November 2011. Real estate agents, at least in the form of corredores, had operated informally for years, for decades even, acting as intermediaries in permutas or home sales disguised as permutas even before home sales became legal. But the real estate agencies that I focus on today are different. To start with, they operate legally with a license, have employees, formal storefronts, even multiple offices in some cases, and foreign ties, very importantly. And this is just to name a few of the more pronounced differences with the corredores of the past, which continue to exist in a parallel market today. In this talk, I provide a descriptive overview of real estate agencies currently operating in Havana, highlighting some initial tendencies and patterns that I draw from my data. I draw on data from the Dirección de Trabajo in Havana, the websites and social media of real estate agencies operating in Havana, and 16 interviews with owners, managers, and employees of 9 real estate agencies. And these are interviews that I conducted in late 2015 and early 2016. These preliminary findings are one piece of a much larger dissertation project in which I look at how Cubans are navigating the emerging real estate market in order to gain insight into how they are navigating the economic reforms more broadly and the resulting changes in society. In September 2013, almost 2 years after legalizing the free market sale of residential real estate, the Cuban state added the profession of real estate agent to the list of the 201, or at that point it became 201, authorized self-employment activities, under a category named Gestor de Permutas y Compraventa de Viviendas. According to data from the Dirección de Trabajo in Havana, by the end of February 2016, a total of 365 licenses had been granted in Havana in this category. Of those, 228 individuals, or 62%, had already forfeited their license in the short 2.5-year window between when the license opened up in October 2013 and when I gained access to the data at the close of February 2016. So that leaves 137 at that point were still active, according to official records. A good portion of these work as, we could call them freelancers, so to speak, unaffiliated with real estate agencies. Of the 137 total active real estate agents, 16 had registered employees, trabajadores contratados, which we may interpret as a proxy for the number of real estate agencies that exist. By my estimate, based on my observations during fieldwork, this number is about accurate. I would probably estimate between 15 and 20 real estate agencies with storefronts and employees. There's more that call themselves perhaps an agency but lack these characteristics. 3 real estate agencies, in fact, have more than one office location, but I don't count these additional locations as separate real estate agencies, but rather as one. In any case, real estate agents make up only a small fraction of the over 500,000 self-employed workers currently operating across the island. But the importance of these actors, I argue, lies not in the numbers, not in the size, but rather in what they represent. In contrast to most of the other 201 sanctioned forms of self-employment, real estate agencies have a higher earning potential, so a commission even of 1% on a $100,000 house is significant. Wider scope, so whereas we have other, people filling lighters with fuel or taking pictures with tourists in a one-character costume, this kind of activity embarks a much wider scope and also potentially greater opportunity to employ skilled labor. So we see, for example, architects and lawyers operating, at least in a fashion, more in line with their profession, rather than operating taxis or paladares or casas particulares. And this is why they deserve our attention, or at least part of the reason why they do. To start with, who are the actual human actors behind these real estate agencies? My interview data indicates that neither the employees nor the owners or managers are the corredores that had been operating and that are still operating in the shadows for years. In fact, none of my interviewees had previous experience as real estate agents, except for one who had worked in one of these agencies when it first opened up and then moved over and opened up her own. And there's another case of someone who worked abroad, had some experience in real estate abroad, and went back to Cuba, Cubana, and opened up a real estate agency there. But for the most part, the employees definitely did not have experience as real estate agents. As far as ownership goes, most agencies have transnational ties, but not, as one may assume at first, to Miami. Rather, their ties are primarily to Europe, to Spain in particular, but also Italy, Germany, Great Britain, France, Switzerland, also to a lesser extent Canada. In some cases, these are Cubans who have lived and maintained residency abroad, but spend significant time on the island running the agency. In other cases, the owner is completely foreign, but has managed to obtain permanent residence in Cuba. And finally, there are cases in which the real owner or financier is a foreigner who lives abroad and operates through associates on the island. Cuban associates, of course. These owners with transnational ties bring with them capital, money certainly, but also knowledge and experience of real estate models from abroad, which they then import to Cuba. And they also bring networks of potential foreign buyers. Now, I want to remind you that foreigners are not legally allowed to own homes in Cuba, except for in certain condos built mostly in the late 90s into the 2000s, specifically for foreigners in zoned places, a lot of them in Miramar and in some areas of the playa. Only Cubans and permanent residents are allowed to own homes in Cuba, and even they are limited to one principal residence and then one vacation or beach home. They're limited in another way as well, which is that there's no financing, no mortgages in Cuba. So buyers need to pay cash up front. And what amount of cash are we talking about? I put together a table of the number of properties for sale by real estate agencies in Havana as of mid-July 2017. 7 agencies are represented in the table. These are all the agencies, as far as I'm aware, that have a website with listings of properties for sale. Several others don't have functioning websites. They may have a Facebook page, or their website is under maintenance. Looks like some of them have suspended their activities. And I excluded 2 because one website was very outdated, and another, which had over 2,000 listings, had too many misclassified or misleading listings. For example, houses supposedly for sale for under 100 COC. And this is the issue again with Revoli, Compra Libre. Anytime that someone isn't putting it up standard, but you open it up to the population, there's some misclassification that happens, and that appears to be what was happening in that case. What I want to draw attention to in this first table is the really wide spread in the price of properties for sale, from just a few thousand COC to close to or even reaching, and in one case surpassing, 1 million COC. The lower and upper bounds of this price range provide some clues about the potential buyers that different real estate agencies cater to. For example, we may infer that Inmobiliaria number 4, whose lowest price property is 65,000 COC, does not serve your average Cuban. And in fact, if we look at the website of that particular Inmobiliaria, we see that it's entirely in English with no Spanish translation. And a closer look at the marketing and the characteristics of the properties reveal that this particular Inmobiliaria has a very clear niche, which is luxury properties targeted to foreigners. And while foreigners definitely comprise a substantial client base for all of the Inmobiliarias in this list, as my interviews confirmed, most don't cater just exclusively to foreigners, though, but rather have a variety of properties at different price points. Now, table 2 builds on this first table. I'm actually going to show this one, which is a little larger. It's just the first 3 columns are the same as the last, and then I break it up into price range, going from under 10,000 COC, and then from 10 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 300, 300 to $500,000, and then $500,000 and above. So this is showing the distribution of the properties for sale in Havana by each Inmobiliaria by price range. It shows for each agency the number of properties as well as the percentage of the total number of properties that fall into these different price ranges. For each Inmobiliaria, I bolded this cell with the highest proportion of property listings. And so you can see, and you probably can't see my mouse on the screen, but for 3 of the 7, they have the highest proportion in this 100 to 300,000 COC range. 2 of them do have it in the lower 10 to 30,000, but it's still only comprising less than a third of the listings. So if we look at all the others, it kind of skews to the right in terms of property prices. As you can see from the table, Inmobiliarias hardly concern themselves with properties priced under 10,000 COC, and I won't get into this here, but if we later talk about the Corredores de Prado and the different ones from the different barrios, there tends to be a market. This is the properties that, although they do sell higher priced properties, some specialize in these lower price ones. Keep in mind that a Cuban earning, and this is the very bottom row, keep in mind that a Cuban earning a median salary in Cuba of 29 COC per month, which was just announced a few weeks ago, would have to work for 29 years without spending a cent on anything else, any other expense, to be able to buy a home worth just 10,000 COC. 86 years for a house priced at 30,000 COC, and 144 years for a house priced at 50,000. Your average Cuban doesn't buy a home from savings accumulated from wages. And while either informal borrowing or remittances may enable some Cubans to buy homes, probably modest ones, it seems that the way most Cubans are able to buy a home is only after selling their own. A common strategy among Cubans, my interviewees at the real estate agencies told me, is for sellers to downsize. Sell their home and then buy a less expensive one in order to have money left over for other purchases and some savings, maybe to open up a business, to buy a car, or simply to have a cushion. This is one reason why Inmobiliarias might have some listings in the 10 to 30,000 range to give sellers wanting to downsize options. So the sellers become buyers within the same Inmobiliaria. The lack of financing and therefore the need to wait for one's own house to sell in order to buy another one creates chains of dependency. And if one link falters, the entire chain may break. There's also the issue that an initial injection of money needs to take place in order to activate the chain. And this is where all roads, or at least many, seemingly lead to El Yuma, right? Foreigners eager to invest in the nascent real estate market in Cuba, while prices are still relatively low by international standards, are buying homes in Cuba, and not just in the designated condos that I mentioned earlier. Now, unless they're permanent residents, their names don't appear anywhere in the title of the homes, and that they pay tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars for. This is where the phenomenon of the prestanombre and a whole lot of trust comes into play. They need to find a Cuban whose name to put on the title, but who they trust will respect the informal arrangement. Often this is a romantic partner or a friend or sometimes a friend of a friend, and it always involves great risk. The real estate agencies I interviewed claim to simply explain these rules to foreigners, but not actually be involved in connecting them to Cubans who may serve as prestanombres. Another common illicit practice, common among both foreigners but also Cubans, which real estate agencies are party to in the sense of them facilitating the transaction, is to sell the home at one price in ASCE, but in the paperwork claim a much lower legal price in ASCE, which is usually at the minimum legal price determined by the state, right? The community architect, maybe a little bit more. The motive for doing so, of course, is to reduce the tax liability of both the buyer and seller, who each owe 4% of the sale price of the home at the time of the sale and no longer pay. There's no property tax, annual property tax, but they pay this tax at the time of the sale. This practice, too, exposes both parties to risk. The seller, who is only guaranteed the minimum amount, and the buyer, in case she later wants to claim legal recourse. Real estate agencies play a key role in educating the foreign buyer about these local practices. Foreigners tend to use their services because they are used to the agency model back home. They are often pressed for time since they live off of the island, but also they need help understanding this foreign legal landscape. But Cubans too, according to my interviewees, are using the services of real estate agencies in growing numbers, and not just as sellers, but also as buyers. But I don't want to give the impression that these agencies are seeing high sales volumes. On the contrary, many of my interviewees said that 1 to 2 sales per month was average, and a good month was one where they might get 4 more sales. While earning a commission on the sale of a home can be lucrative, sales remain relatively few and far between, despite news articles that have come out of the international press proclaiming a real estate boom in Cuba. Moreover, the fees real estate agencies charge for example, listing a property for sale on the website is quite nominal. It should be no surprise then that real estate agencies have begun to offer additional related services such as decorating, remodeling, repairs or construction. But much more common, with very few exceptions actually, is to see a real estate agency facilitating the rental of properties. The rentals are almost always short-term, usually priced by day, though sometimes by month, in hard currency, the ASCE. In other words, geared primarily towards tourists. Rentals are the bread and butter of these agencies, providing a more steady, even if proportionally smaller, revenue stream. In the time that remains, I want to bring up some concerns and challenges as they relate to the real estate sector. I don't have time today during this presentation to present an exhaustive list, but I bring up a few to call attention to some of the more concerning impacts of the otherwise celebrated opening of the real estate market in Cuba. I've already mentioned the lack of mortgage financing, which prevents the vast majority of Cubans from buying homes, unless, of course, they're currently property owners, which comes with this historical legacy of inheriting properties and who was able to and who was not. Having to sell their home first before being able to buy another, but even if they're successful in doing so, they're limited in what property they can afford. I've also mentioned the risks that both buyers and sellers are exposed to in not documenting the actual sale price of a home, as well as the risks involved in not having a home in one's name. We should expect to see, I think, significant problems arising from these issues in the coming years, kind of informal ways to resolve these issues. We will also likely see, I think, the gentrification of certain neighborhoods in the coming years, unless measures are taken to stem the process. In fact, the process seems to have already begun in Old Havana. And on the one hand, foreigners and other buyers with money tend to renovate these spaces, which may have fallen into disrepair because the previous owners didn't have the means to maintain the property. But Cuban residents are being displaced from these areas, either actively, so in some cases real estate agencies knocking on the doors of people who are not selling their homes and convincing them to sell their homes, especially in La Habana Vieja, now that the cruceros are coming there especially, or as a byproduct of the process of gentrification. And I won't talk more about that. The Oficina del Historiador de La Habana is doing a study on gentrification because they're aware that this is an issue. According to my interviewees at the real estate agency, many of the foreign buyers buy residential real estate in Havana in order to convert it into a business, primarily a bed and breakfast for tourists, or sometimes a restaurant, a baladad, and then use it also as a vacation home when they travel to the island. They tend to buy, unsurprisingly, in the areas most attractive to tourists, Old Havana especially, and also Santa Ana, Bedao, Miramar. These businesses tend to be oriented towards the tourist market and are priced above what average Cubans can afford, but there's a second issue of concern that I haven't heard many talking about, which is converting living spaces to commercial space is exacerbating the already dire deficit in housing in Cuba. Just this month during the National Assembly, and we've heard it several times between today and yesterday, a government representative announced that Cuba faces a housing deficit of over 880,000 units. 5 years ago, Carmelo Mesalago said that he estimates it's over 1 million, and a stunning number, which is a stunning number when one keeps in mind that the population is 11.2 million. So these are just a few of the concerns about the social impacts of the much celebrated opening of the real estate market in Cuba. I highlight them as a way to invite us to think about how the reforms underway in Cuba bring sometimes unanticipated challenges and have uneven effects across the population. Any discussion about economic reform in Cuba should always include the question of who benefits and who doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And lastly, we'll ask Mr. Pujol to comment on the three presentations. You want to do it from there?
Yeah, I can do it. Can you hear me from there? Well, unfortunately, I was drafted into this position at a rather late date because Antonio Galloso, who was supposed to be here as a commentator, had an accident just before the conference and he damaged his leg and he could not fly. So at the last minute he called me. And I did not get the chance to read this Jolivet paper before, so I really have a problem there that I don't, but I will try to comment in general. And even the other papers I read at the last minute. But I'll comment in general on the market and on the situation in the real estate. As was pointed out by Sergio, Cuba had a very large, particularly Havana, had a very large stock of housing that was left vacant by the exodus of a very large part of the population. When the revolution took over, Cuba had about 7 million people, and now has about 11. But there were about 2 million people that left the country, or perhaps more than that. And that created a lot of housing, which the government used to distribute to particularly the people that have been involved in their support and gain support also that way. Now, the people that took over these houses did not really have a property for it. They did not have legal status in many cases. Eventually the government did take some measures to try to legalize a little bit by renting them sort of with a rental, but eventually could become the owners of some of these things. But there was no, despite the fact that the government had talked about housing being a problem that has to be addressed, as was pointed out by Sergio, the emphasis was a little bit more in the rural areas, but very little was done in Havana, in this area. And over the years, the government really did not apply much resources to maintain or to improve the housing area, except for some buildings that were built in Havana for the Soviet type of buildings and so on, which were poorly built, and there have been a lot of problems in these buildings now. Very shortly after they were built, they were having all kinds of problems, problems with the water, problems with pieces of the building sometimes would collapse, and so on and so forth. And so right now there is a serious problem, particularly, well, not only in Havana, all throughout the country, of all buildings that have not been maintained and are collapsing. And this is, and in addition, you have the hurricanes that hit the island with quite a frequency, and that caused damage to housing, and the government was unable to also repair and provide for the these buildings to be able to be used. So, so this contributed, all of this contributed to this situation where there is a serious problem of housing. And, housing meaning housing that can be really used and is habitable. Now, and this problem now, more recently, I think particularly as the younger generation of the revolutionaries realized that all of a sudden some of the older people are dying and so on, and they would like to be able to go back and establish some property rights. And that's why I think has led to some of the measures that have been adopted to try to be able to ensure that property rights, because for a long time property rights were a no-no. And the government was certainly not only not interested in sustaining property rights, but even trying to eliminate them altogether. Now, the experience in Eastern Europe is interesting because after the revolution, after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, in particular in the Eastern European cities and European countries, they started trying to do something about the housing. And if you look at what has happened there is that a lot of housing was eventually repaired, and there is a market for it and so on. But what you did find was that in many cases, the properties were offered back to the original owners, and in some cases the owners did not want to take them because it was too expensive to repair or to try to do something with it. And in other cases there were choice properties, and I remember even in Prague, there is an impressive building that is just around the corner from the palace, and it would make a fantastic hotel because the site is really, and it's abandoned. And I asked why was that the case, and he said, well, because there is a legal fight between all the people that claim to have the right of ownership of it, and this has been going on for 15 years, and they can't get to a solution. And I saw that not only in Prague, I saw that in Eastern Germany and in other places. So, it is a problem when you try to go back and establish a legal system whereby people have the right. Now, in Havana, now there is all this development of the market, and particularly not just to sell to foreigners, but to sell even domestically, because people had a big problem when the families change in size and so on, and they try to move and get to some other property. And the government did not want to recognize the private property concept, and therefore they allowed what they call the permutas. It was an exchange, which is very inefficient and very complicated system, but it was used by a lot of people to try to resolve their problems of space and so on. And then in more recent times, particularly since it was possible for Cubans that had left the country in exile to go back and visit, and the relatives to come out and in and out, that the possibility for a market developed. And there is a big market here in Miami for housing in Cuba. And I know people here that were able to sell their house in Cuba and are living off the savings that they made out of selling the house, and that's what they're living for, because these people do not have a right to have Social Security or any other retirement, and this is their retirement. And I know people here that are living that way. So there is a market for that. And the question is always the legality. And that's the big orangutan in the room that nobody knows which way it would go. Because there are people that do have claims on some of these properties that are abroad, that exile. And there are people that have made legal arrangements so that they hope that at some point they can try to make those claims valid. I don't know whether that will ever happen, but I know that there is, and there are lawyers here here and in Spain, you know, who have made a profession of trying to represent possible claims against the Cuban government or against individual people that are occupying the properties, particularly choice properties. The houses that are still there in Varadero, you know, are probably all in that category, and in other places as well. So this is issues that are kind of hanging in there. It's interesting, and you know, I think it's a welcoming thing that there is a market developing for resolving some of these issues at least in Havana, some other places too, but mostly Havana. Now, in Cuba there is a problem because the people that live in other parts of the country are not necessarily allowed to move to Havana, particularly the Palestinos, you know, the people from all the way to the east of the island, have been, really, to move within Cuba, the mobility within Cuba, you were talking about mobility in a different sense, but you know, mobility within Cuba is very much restricted by the system because if you are a resident in Camagüey, you might not necessarily be able to move to Havana. Although, of course, in Cuba there's always a way of doing things that are not necessarily legal, but that are kind of people look on the side. But I think the biggest problem in all that, in all the marketing for housing, is the problem of that you get this house that you are able to buy, and then you want to do some repairs. And then how do you get the material to do the repair? There is no wholesale store that you can go like in here and buy the wood or buy the nails or buy the things that you need to repair the house. That doesn't exist. So therefore you have to engage in black market activities to be able to do that. So this creates a whole problem of legality within the system. So somebody who buys a property in Cuba right now, whether a foreigner or a Cuban, finds himself that if he wants to do some repairs and be able to make it habitable, conveniently habitable, then he has to engage into the black market to be able to resolve the problem. There's no other way. Unless you happen to be a government official that a member of the military, a member of the family that can make the arrangements. But even then, it's black market too. So anyhow, these are the comments that I have. People here, if you have questions, and address them.
Thank you, Joaquin. I'm going to suggest a procedure, if you all agree. I will ask 3 people to ask questions, just take notes. So we'll accumulate, we'll answer them, and then we'll go to 3 more people. So let's start with the first 3 people. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, this is a fascinating session.
Can you identify yourself to be nice?
Yes, Robert.
We know who you are. But
University of Maryland. Also a graduate of the same institution Martinez had. The session is quite fascinating because there are 2 very specific oriented papers have very different stages of development in Havana. I think it's fair to say your paper has a very broad range, but you're at the initial stages of the process, where at least what Martina presented seems to be pretty close to the final stages. And then Sergio presented an overview, and Joaquin brought in the issues of legality. But then let me start with that last point. I think that, yes, all these legal issues are there, but you seem to miss that Martina made a point about how some of these issues have been resolved, which she pointed out that these immobiliarias are providing services, and one of the services they're providing is this renovation. And the real estate agents, being local, might have more access to these informal arrangements on how to get the resources to renovate the properties, particularly the more valuable ones. So that's the comment of Joaquin's comment. With respect to what is at an initial stage, my main comment or question, you emphasize rights to the city, which sounds fine, but there are a lot of people that have rights to the city, and given what you just have done, this seems to be the rights of foreign elites, and who you ask, the common people don't seem to show up in your research in terms of the rights to the cities, and that ties into the problem of these Palestinians and these migrants that are not supposed to even be allowed to live in Havana. And so, coming finally to Sergio's paper, which is an overview, there is something that you did that I like, but you missed it. You pointed out that part of the creation of housing was all these people that left. And that's a good point, and insightful point. But then providing your data, you didn't take account of a major change introduced by another reform. There was a reform in 2013 of the migration law. And what happens is, you know, the cost of living in Cuba are now much lower as a result of that, particularly with respect to your property, because you can be outside for 2 years before you lose your rights. And you can even renew that twice. And so the stock of housing, all of a sudden, available has gone down as a result of that reform. And with that, so I think you want to factor that in. And so, anyway, that's all.
Okay, the other two people were?
I just have a couple of questions. Very, very fascinating study. One, it's clear the authorities are fully aware of the Fresco Homeless is going on, and the foreigners are indeed moving in. Did you, in your work or with your immobiliarios, discover any pushback from the government or the authorities to this obvious violation of the spirit of the laws? Secondly, Mexico for years and years has a constitutional prohibition against sales of property within 50 kilometers of the seacoast or 100 kilometers of the border to foreigners. However, this has been overcome big time by the use of a corporation in Mexico by foreigners, and on a corporate structure which is a Mexican entity owns the property. Has there been any move to move into a more legal and trustable situation in Mexico? And third, could you expand a little bit on the fees and commissions which the immobiliarios charge for sale and rent? Terrific study.
And the last question?
Fascinating panel. I have two questions. My first one is for Martina. Is there an industry of movers? And the second question is, I was always wondering if the mistreatment or neglect of the cities in Cuba, if there's a specific mistrust, dislike of Havana. If there's a particular sort of negative feeling that the Castro government has had since the beginning, particularly for Havana, for whatever reason.
Okay, so we want to start. Yeah?
Okay, so about the right to the city and is that okay?
Here's another one.
So the right to the city is more a theory about how people get access to centrality, which is the main concept of Lefebvre. And the thing about talking about right to the city is not only talking about elite and bourgeois, it's showing that those central part of Havana who were totally mixed, or even more, if you go to San Isidro and Belén, for example, who are in the center of La Habana Vieja, you have really popular neighborhood, and they are displaced because of the renovation. So because of the renovation in some point, and because of the touristification in the other one. And it's not only because, as you say, it's not only because the prices are getting higher or because they are only like bar and cook. It's also because people want to buy there and so offer money. That's exactly what Morena says. It's just knocking on the door and saying, okay, I give you like, I don't know, $100,000 and you sell it to me. And so people don't have the same possibility, capacity to say yes or no. If you are like struggling in your solar, te dan $100,000 and you just think once. You say, okay, I go and I live in Marianao, I live wherever. So it's not about only looking to elites. It's also looking how people that want to stay and resist the change will, like in my interview, the plan is also to get some information about who want to stay and how mixity, which was huge in Havana during the revolution, in those kind of neighborhoods, it's going to change. So I'm not only going to interview elites or bourgeois. The second point was about Havana in the Castro reforms, and yes, in the 70s and from the revolution to the 70s, most of the urban reform were to make the country more equal, and so was counter the development of Havana. Havana was neglect in the planification plan because they wanted all the city of the province to be developed more than Havana center. So yeah, there was like a political view about not developing, like no cuidar tanto a La Habana.
Regarding the pushback about the Presta Nombre, Eusebio Leal gave a speech in Old Havana about this, knowing, and if you talk to any Cuban on the block, that house is a Spanish person's house, usually men, right? Spanish guy, Italian, Canadian. I mean, it's known that properties are owned by foreigners, and especially along the Malecón, which is, a lot of them want the seaside, seafront property, and through like all of the Casco Histórico, which they're buying low, and around the different plazas as well, the Cuatro Plazas de La Habana Vieja. This is known, and Eusebio said in his speech, surprisingly, kind of not condoning it, but in the end, it's the Cuban name on the title. So legally, although I don't know, and I haven't heard of any cases of foreigners being expelled, the title or the property being taken from them. And this is why I say I think that in future years we will see these issues as romantic or even friendships dissolve, which is inevitable. You'll have to find, if you can't go through courts legally, right, because you have no claim on the property, it has to be done through an informal arrangement. So what is that informal arrangement, how they will enforce it, whether it involves violence or other kind. I think we will see that in the coming years, and that's something to pay attention to. But of course the government's aware of this Presta Nombre problem. And then the other illicit transaction that I mentioned, which is selling and getting COC, but getting your cheque de herencia and COP, and that has to go through a bank transaction, right? So you go together, and I've accompanied people in my field for 2 years. You go to the bank, you write the the check, the other person gets the check, you go back to the notaria, over there you get everything, there's a legal process to this. So it's not you hand it in, the real estate agency does it for you, you need to often accompany this. And the government just in April of this year raised the legal minimum. So there's an issue that's out in the Gaceta Oficial, I can't remember which numero it is, with new guidelines in general for houses of this many rooms in this area, the new legal minimums, because they're very aware, and the state was losing lots of revenue, tax revenue from this. How much that'll actually increase? Not much. It's still a huge difference. So cases of houses, being sold for tens of thousands of CUC and being claimed as, for example, 8,000 CUP. Like extreme differences. So that April measure was just an initial step. As for the corporate structure in Mexico, I'm not so familiar with the Mexican case, but I think that's what I was talking about with the condos that are there specifically for foreigners. And this was kind of in the 90s, took a while to build, right? But after the fall of the Soviet Union and the Periodo Especial and attracted like tourism and business attracting different businesses, Spanish and otherwise, to construct hotels, but also to have other business relations with Cuba. The businessmen, and you actually look at the old state newspapers, and they talk in this language as well. The businessmen, all men, right, who come to Cuba need somewhere to stay longer term, and they were actually allowed to buy, in many cases, in these condos. And that's gone back and forth, buying or just being able to rent. But many of them still have, and this is the legal titles that they do have. Now those places, for example, the edificio or the Inmobiliaria Azul in, Primera, Tercera, around there in El Vedal, these apartments are, for a 2-bedroom condo, it could go 60,000, 80,000. They're luxury apartments in the Cuban context. We wouldn't necessarily call them luxury here, but with their garden, additional amenities and security and this sort of thing. So that kind of structure already does exist. But what I'm talking about is foreigners buying outside that structure, which, for relatively deals, because you're not going to get a deal in that foreign, there's a foreigner selling to you. And there's also something interesting, which I have in a footnote in the paper, I didn't bring it up during, and I need to learn more about this actually, I don't have all of the answers about this. There's a new visa category, which is the real estate visa category, which pertains to these individuals. What it actually means, I can't decipher exactly from the text of itself, and I think it's referring only to, it's for foreigners, right, who have real estate in Cuba.
Which is illegal.
But, so they're allowed to enter the country. Let me find this footnote. Yeah, it's called Real Estate Residente de Inmobiliaria, which is a category along with, you could look this up. And it says that they can enter Cuba under this real estate resident visa with permission to stay in Cuba for 1 year, which may be renewed for another year. So this, it's Decreto 305, modificativo del decreto número 26. So it's the migration law, artículo 92, 93, 92 and 93, which explains that. The other question was on fees and commissions. So this is something, in the street, for example, the Corredor de Prado will sometimes, well, it depends on who you ask, I guess, is the answer. So sometimes buyers or sellers would rather say, I don't want their services because I tell them one price, and then they put on another 5,000. They put on another 10,000, the corredores, and then my property doesn't sell. So they're looking for their cut. Whereas others say, oh, we don't do that, it's up front and we charge 5%. And it's been, 10% in the past, either like attaching a price like an actual dollar amount above or a percentage. More commonly, they'll tell you it's a percentage. At some points, it was 10% commission. Now, the Corredor de Prado are around 5. Some will do it for lower. It's all negotiated, right? So this is a negotiation. Now, the real estate agencies can charge anywhere between 1% and 5%. So calculate that on the actual sale price, right? Obviously, they're getting the commission on the sale price and not the sale price. The fees itself, this would be, for example, for listing a property, for how many months you go into the agency, and some of them have like a more restricted model and different contracts. Like, so Now it's kind of in moda to do non-exclusive contracts, because if you're tied to the agency, you're waiting for the agency to sell your property. So now many have these properties registered in different agencies, but are also trying to sell on their own, put up their own signs. And if they manage to do that, there's another game going on there in terms of real estate agencies not wanting to give out the exact location. So there's this game with corredores in la calle. You say the approximate location to the person, but you don't want to tell the buyer the location, because then the buyer goes directly to the house and deals, and they cut out the middleman.
What about the movers?
There are movers. There's always a truck, for example, parked in Galeano along the end there, and other people need, the classic problem in Cuba of transporte, and so many don't have camiones. Camiones are available, but individuals, yes, you could hire as well, but at least the trucks to rent and then move your property by the hour, those definitely exist. I don't get into that so much in my dissertation, but they're there.
Sergio, what about the question of the migration reform and the impact on the housing
I have
stock?
a few questions, points and commentary. Rafael is exactly right, and we don't know what I haven't really thought about it much, but it seems to me, going back to Joaquin, that may play into the viability of survival in the Miami community by renting, which is not contemplated, as far as I know, in the housing legislation. So if you come to Miami, well, the house stays vacant. So what do you do with that? Could be, bread and breakfast type situation also. So it's even connected to the self-employment area. The house stays vacant, you can get people, you can even market these services. Yeah, that's a good point. To the point about the neglect, there was a famous saying in the 60s and 70s, if you all, the older ones of us remember, un mínimo de urbanismo y un máximo de ruralismo. That was a statement made repeatedly, and by design, Havana was neglected. There's no question about it. One more. The other question that I think Marlene made that point, and then Martina, you asked the question, I think the resolution you have in mind is 8093, which is the Executive Council resolution. And I didn't discuss that, but this is another bureaucratic mess, the valores referenciales. So they were underpaying taxes in the transactions. So they came up with the valores referenciales, which really means the buyers and the sellers determine the value on the basis of some guidelines. So many bedrooms, whether you have a garage, whether you have a patio, a bathroom, or what. And the obvious case is that, like any bureaucracy, the rule doesn't cut in every place. It doesn't take into account whether you are in Coli or you are in La Víbora. So, that has a place. And also, interestingly enough, the valor referencial is not really the transaction value. It is whichever is the highest. So they say, well, if the actual transaction value agreed to is higher than the valor referencial, that is the tax base. So it's the same thing in the repairs. It's interesting that, looking at the I was looking more at the long-term solution. In the repairs, it's very convoluted, very bureaucratic, and people are not given money. Like here, you get a bank subsidy or a loan from the bank, you get the cash, and you use it as you want. In Cuba, they give you a voucher. So if you are going to hire some self-employed guy, and they cannot get him because the guys are charging more, the trucks. They cannot get the trucks because the guy says, wow, I'm going to take a voucher when I can go through the market mechanism and get paid a lot more. So all the problems associated with imperfect markets are emerging, it seems to me, in Cuba. It would have to be resolved over time, and the reforms always, they may put the brake if they see something that is not where they want to see. But we don't know.
Along those lines, I recently was in Cuba for a couple of weeks, and I experienced, and this may be anecdotal, and certainly not the basis for a major assertion, but I saw that a lot of the B&Bs were actually owned by Cuban families that were back and forth from the United States to Havana, and they actually used the back and forth to carry supplies. And to the repairs they needed to do, so they would carry these large bags full of whatever supplies they needed to maintain their B&Bs. So that was a question that I thought found interesting. So let's have some more questions, please.
Armando Linde. Some of my Cuban American friends often argue that once a Cuban, you're always a Cuban. Even if you acquire a different citizenship, you cannot renounce your legal Cuban status. That must be wrong, because Cuban Americans cannot buy property in Cuba and take title. Right?
No, they can't.
I knew the answer would be short.
Hola, mi nombre es Ovidia del Castillo. Primero, me excuso por no haber llegado a tiempo temprano. No sé si este tema se trató o no. Pero como siempre, yo me preocupo por la gente que está viviendo en Cuba, más que por los negocios, los futuros investments o el futuro de cómo se va a desarrollar el real estate en Cuba. En estos momentos, hace ya varios años, yo estoy sufragando, digamos, la renovación de la casa de mis abuelos, donde están viviendo. Mi tía falleció en enero, pero bueno, mis primos, sus hijos, todo. Es un gran proyecto. Y las trabas que el mismo gobierno pone para hacer estas renovaciones a cubanos dentro de Cuba, porque yo no aparezco allí para nada, yo nada más que les doy el dinero, ellos son los propietarios, ellos son los que están haciendo las cosas, ellos quieren, como decía, legalmente está dividida la casa de 3 plantas en 3 apartamentos y está legalmente considerado, así que eso existe en Cuba, se puede hacer. El problema es que para hacer el techo, cuando fui la primera vez, había una habitación que ya ese techo se había caído. Cuando se logró empezar el proceso, ya todo el techo tuvo que hacerlo de nuevo. O sea, el costo mismo aumenta para el bolsillo. Para hacer los permisos, había que obtener una brigada que era la que iba a apuntalar parte de la estructura para que no se cayera mientras...
Olga, ¿cuál es la pregunta?
La pregunta es si ellos, en sus investigaciones, vieron el mercado de la persona que está viviendo allí, cómo puede hacer esas reparaciones, el proceso que tienen que seguir. Y siento mucho que me digas que es una pregunta, pero es un comentario muy válido. Que me apena a mí mucho que nadie se preocupe por la gente que vive en Cuba y que tienen que resolver las cosas al día. ¿Me puede responder?
My name is Fernando Diner from Inca Investments. I asked the same question to the foreign exchange panel, so I thought I'd try with you. I think everyone understands that there's a huge overvaluation of the Cuban convertible peso, and it's just a function of time before it has to go through not just a devaluation, but a maxi devaluation. I know that theoretically prices for real estate are dollarized to an extent, so I want to ask the panel what their opinion is. Once this maxi devaluation happens, what will happen to Cuban real estate prices? Thank you.
Thank you.
About the first comment, I do want to make a caveat about Cuban Americans owning, I mean, not in their own name, unless it is with the migration law of January 2013, right? So as long as you return to the territory. So before, if you manage to sell your home before emigrating, and the state found out, that process could be undone, right? Because it was an illegal sale. Well, because sales weren't allowed, right? Many people did. But now, for those emigrating here or elsewhere, right? As long as they re-enter the territory before the 24-month mark, they maintain all of their derechos, including the one to have a house. And actually, there's a process now for Cubans who have technically technically emigrated and have the status of emigrated to repatriate yourself to Cuba, and to get that then permission. And there was an article that came out not too long ago saying that over 13,000 Cubans have done this, right? It's more than that, but that was 13,000 the last year.
But it's around 60,000 in the year.
Yeah, and I think the only thing about it, I think you have to look at generational. You know, like you and I, we came in the 60s, we can travel to Cuba with an American passport. We can even apply for a Cuban passport. So, you know, this is just recent immigrants, but the history, you know, my house still in Cuba. I mean, it's not mine anymore. Anyway, your question, all you have to read, grab and read all the, you know, Cuba. It's all over the place about the message they have in what we tell you.
But I want that discussed here.
I did. It was discussed. I mean, it's in the Cuban press is all over the place. They got a gigantic mess. They know it's a gigantic mess. But that the bureaucracy will not allow to be resolved. That's part of the conflict between control and liberalization. It's always a logarithm. That's what it is.
Any other comments on the renovation process?
Yeah, and then the dollarization as well. But on the renovation, I think your point is very valid, that of course you have to look at what Cubans are actually experiencing on island. That's what my dissertation is about. Here I talked about a small piece, which is real estate agencies, and that's why foreigners come up a lot, because foreigners are the buyers. The flip side, who are the sellers, are the Cubans. So, and they're buyers as well, but the point of my dissertation is about how Cubans themselves are navigating these reforms, both on the side as sellers and buyers, but also as intermediaries facilitating these purchases. So positioned differentially and with different relationships to kind of the real estate market. I don't look specifically at repairs, right? There was one person that commented to me in an interview about how this seems to be a great process because people kind of filter into the, how to describe it. Now that people are able to buy and sell, kind of find the property that they can maintain. That's theoretical, right? This isn't actually happening because there's so many things that actually go on on the ground. But this person's idea was this is a great reform. This is a person who is working without a license and selling homes.
Is there any comment on the overvaluation issue? Any of you?
I have on housing prices, an issue as well is that since this market didn't exist or was mostly a market of Bermudas and later became one of sales, although sales did happen as well in the past before they were legal. A common complaint that I heard from my interviewees is that people aren't pricing based on the characteristics of the house, but rather on their personal desires. So I need to buy a car, or I need to emigrate. I need X cantidad de dinero. So that is how much, that's how I come up with the price of my home. And once the market starts to develop, and then you have my neighbor with this property sold it for this neighbor, then there's other referential values. But that's
Going back to the dollarization issues, the only thing I can say when I hear at this conference and elsewhere, my macroeconomist friends, they don't see this happening anytime soon. So I don't think we need to worry for a while. I think, you know, when that happens, it's really revolutionary, it seems to me, given this situation.
I'm sorry, but we're going to have to stop. But I want to just simply comment at the end that we are, I am personally and particularly pleased to see that we're finally getting some data on these issues to talk about. And I think both of you are to be commended for the effort that you're putting in collecting this information and bringing it to the analysis. So thank you very much for your presentation.
You have one more question of a person that lives in Cuba, that is here in the program.
No, pero tenemos que cerrar, señora.
No importa, que se puede esperar.
Bueno, pero la pregunta la puedo hacer privadamente, por favor. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos.